Thank you so much for your part of the show.
I'm out.
Right now, we're going to talk to Jay Light. Jay is a longtime resident of Fort Myers Beach. He is a veteran, by the way, and we're going to start by talking about his service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it very much. Welcome to Beach Talk Radio. You are in the spotlight now, my friend. Probably never heard of us before or what the hell's going on here. But.
That's exactly right. That's okay. I'm learning quickly.
So tell us first about your service. What'd you do?
Let's go back a little before that. My real life was as a professional musician.
Really?
And
I didn't know that.
Classical oboe player and university professor. As far as my service goes, my very first playing job full-time in a symphony orchestra was in Quebec, Canada, l'Orchestre Symphonique de Québec. And I was up there from 1964 to 66. And that was during the Vietnam business. And at that time, so I was in Canada long before it was fashionable to run to Canada to avoid the draft. When I went up, the deal on the draft was if you were married, you were exempt. And then in 65, during the escalation, suddenly if you were married and didn't have kids, you were no longer exempt. So I was on the top of the list. Rather than stay there, I decided, not out of any great patriotism or support of the war, just practical reasons, made sense to come back because that's where all the good playing jobs were going to be, in symphony orchestras and universities. So the Army was offering a deal then that if you went for 3 years instead of 2, they guaranteed you any training that you had qualified for. And I didn't want to play the oboe in an Army band for a variety of reasons, but I'd had some broadcast experience both in high school in South Jersey, where I was raised, and at the classical music station in Philadelphia, where I studied. And so I decided to go that route and took the broadcast training. I spent 8 months after that in Alabama writing for a Post newspaper, and then was sent to the Panama Canal Zone. And having heard your intro of Good Morning Here, if you've ever seen the Good Morning Vietnam, the Robin Williams movie, I was at the Panama Canal Zone equivalent of that, and my job was as the local news anchor. So at that point, a lot of the job consisted of trying to make the doings of the Officers' Wives Club sound like news, but there were some real serious news stories down there that we covered.
Were you allowed to cover it in a way that you could get the news out to the American public, or was it censored?
My best story about that is the last one I covered for local news was in fact the inauguration of a newly elected president down there, and I had one of the Spanish guys in the newsroom actually got his inaugural speech and translated it for me, and I sat backstage as he pointed to the script following as if I was giving an instant translation. And then 10 days later, the National Guard took over, staged the coup, this would have been 68, 69, and took over the country. And at that point, we were not permitted to cover the story ourselves live. It was happening like 2 miles down the road, but we started out each news report with, according to reports from United Press International, we were taking stuff off the teletype. And I would write the story, mid-afternoon or so, and it went from me to the lieutenant in the newsroom, to the colonel in the Unified Command Public Affairs Office, to the USIA agent in the embassy, because the reality was that our government really wasn't sure which side they wanted to be on in the early days of that thing. And then it would come back down through the channels. By the time I read that at the 6 o'clock news, there wasn't one word of what I had written that was actually in the story.
So, Jay, do you feel like the Vietnam veterans are getting the love they deserve finally?
I do. I haven't made a big deal about that.
None of them do.
It was an important part of my life. Certainly when I got out, nobody thanked me for my service. I'm appreciating the fact that right now, I can go to the Fort Myers Miracle Games free, and I'm getting some discounts and fun and things. And that's certainly nice. It has some meaning. I haven't made a big deal. I know you'd ask me about that, about veterans participation or anything. I did go. They had that big pinning ceremony about a month ago.
Oh,
at
yeah.
Blue Park,
Yeah,
and,
it was massive.
I did that and got the little pin, and then was great.
How emotional was that for people there? It was well attended.
You know, I served honorably. I went where they sent me and did what they assigned me to do, but I certainly never saw combat, and I can certainly understand. I met an awful lot of people who did, and I understand their anxiety and their emotions about it. So,
by the way, you get a military discount here, just so you know. Don't forget to ask for it.
Glad to hear that.
All right. Now, are you involved in any way, veterans now?
No, not really.
Okay. Don't stay in touch with locals or?
Oh, just a couple of people that were in the outfit at the TV station in Panama.
All right, so let's turn to local events.
Sure.
As you know, sooner or later, there's going to be a big, giant Margaritaville over there, and there's a good possibility that we might be doing our show there once in a while. We know some people. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if anybody that's been following the local press, I do a good deal of contributing as guest opinions to both of the local papers. I believe, we're at a point where our civilization is drowning in a tsunami of bullshit, and I can't do anything about that nationally, but I think sometimes I can locally. As far as the Margaritaville project was concerned, if you followed what I had written since it first came out, I was one of its most vocal opponents. I thought the original plan was way overboard and much more than the town wanted or needed. And once it became clear to Tom Torgeson that wasn't going to go, he had the foresight to put together a focus group of some of his most vocal critics, including myself, and essentially,
I didn't know that. I wonder how many people did know that.
Well, if the ones that were here for a long time did. The group met, I think, for about 8 or 9 months. You can ask Tom. And the essence of the group was, all right, what do I have to do to make this acceptable? That you think, obviously we didn't get to vote on whether or not he did it. It was 3 votes on the town council.
Right.
And I think by the time he came up with, I guess it was either plan C or D by then.
3 years later.
He kept downsizing it and everything. I think 6 of the 8 people on that focus group were ready to and did endorse the project. I think it's way past time. And I know you want to talk a little about the lawsuit and everything, which I think is some of the local BS that I'm trying to do away with. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's costing the town a huge amount of money, probably into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for legal fees, staff time wasted messing around with this, not to mention lost revenue in taxes that aren't being paid because the project has been delayed.
So what did you think of the 2 town council members meeting and talking about that? I'm sure you heard it. I'm sure you read it.
Oh yeah, and have written about it. It's a scandal. It's very disappointing. I think they betrayed their oath of office. I think they basically sold the town out. At that point, I think if Ms. Gore really didn't want the project to go through, she should have had the guts to just say, I vote no.
Right.
I think what happened was when it became clear that there were going to be 3 votes in favor, they decided it was better to join them if you can't beat them. And then they had regret about it. I think she got some blowback over it and wanted desperately to change her mind and couldn't. But the idea that they're supporting this, what I'm calling the Patton/Conadaris lawsuit, is scandalous. I think they should have resigned. And frankly, I'm disappointed in the remaining 3 members of the council that they haven't done anything to sanction them. I understand that it takes 3 votes of the remaining 3 to do it. And they're apparently not there.
I've watched some of the meetings. I think Anita has tried, but they pretty much step on her every time she tries to do something.
I understand
that. It's so disrespectful what they do to her at those meetings.
I understand.
Not all of them, but
and
from time to time, it's just it makes you cringe to watch what when you're watching it on TV. How she gets treated. It's so disrespectful for somebody. But that's a whole different subject.
Well,
so if you talk about, let's talk about what we saw in the Observer last week. We saw a full page. I don't know if clearly it was written by them, but it looked like an editorial kind of thing where it was almost endorsed. Coming from the news side of things, it almost looks like it's endorsed by the paper because it doesn't say. I don't believe it said advertorial on the top. I could be wrong.
It did not. No, you're not wrong. It did not say that. And I had a discussion with the editor of the Observer about that and pointed that out. And she said that in future publications, they're going to put that on.
Talk about bullshit.
Well, yeah, that's bullshit. Well, we'll see if they do or if they don't. You know, this last week.
Is that the first day they actually printed the paper? So they didn't really know. Is that their first day to put the paper out?
They've run probably a half a dozen or more of these.
Well, I'm being sarcastic, but I'm just saying next time they're going to do it is if this is the first time these reporters and editors ever come across something like that.
I don't know. Talk to them about it.
So the thing that really got under my skin was the fact that if he wrote it or his PR people wrote it, said that it's time to stop talking and start building.
Yeah.
Well, if he's backing the lawsuit that the patents are behind, then stop the lawsuit and we'll go dig the ground over there. We'll go have a show right over there with some golden shovels.
That's the essence of hypocrisy. You know, the idea. A piece that I wrote, the one that didn't get published, talked about the term chutzpah, which is the classic example of that is the young man who murders his parents and then throws himself on the court begging for mercy because he's an orphan. And this is exactly the same idea, that this guy, he's the one that's causing the hang up, and he has the gall, the chutzpah, to write an editorial, or whoever writes it, slamming Torgeson for not building when he's the one that's hanging it up. You know, this is about as stupid as it can get.
So you decided you were going to, I don't know, it was a letter to the editor or some kind of rebuttal to that, and they didn't want to publish it.
Well, neither paper published it.
Although I understand the Island Sandpaper not wanting to publish something that was published in a different paper. So exactly. I totally get that. But what was the Observer's reason?
You'll have to ask them. You know,
well, they tell you.
They hedged on it, and more interestingly, I had a piece in yesterday's Sandpaper that I also sent to the Observer, and they didn't publish that one either.
The Sandpaper did, the Observer didn't.
The Observer didn't. Now, look, I've had a good relationship with both of the papers. I send them a lot of stuff. I would say they print probably 95% of what I send them, and you know, they have their own reasons, their own policies, and they are what they are, and journalism is what it is here, and that's the way it is.
So what did you talk about what you wrote that did get published? Like, what was your point?
What was in yesterday's, and you can read it in the Sandpaper, was that it was sort of a questionnaire for candidates that are running. As you know, we have 3 candidates that have announced, 2 and others that may or may not announce. They've got till next Friday to file their papers. And these were questions about, well, they were sort of hypothetical scenarios of, well, let's suppose somebody didn't like something that the council did and decided to sue the town, as we know, and the town wins because it's a ridiculous lawsuit. What do you think the town should do about recouping all the money that was lost about that?
Yeah.
And a couple of the other scenarios dealt with how would you deal with these council members who have essentially sold the town out in offering support and encouragement to this woman or Conaderas suing the town. And, you know, that's in the Sandpaper. Anybody who wants to can read that.
Okay, that's in Friday's Sandpaper. So
yes.
So we'll check that out. So let's talk about the election. You know, this is important for the people on the beach to realize they have to get involved in this election. I mean, it's one of the biggest elections. Yeah. I mean, I get it in the small community. Sometimes you get complacent because you have people in there you trust, and you know, and people, you know, they have lives, they have jobs, they're doing their thing. But this is important that people not only, you know, go and vote, but they need to get involved and help these candidates out. Now,
absolutely,
we have 3 candidates now who, if I was living on the island, I'd have a hard time going in and figuring out which 2 out of the 3 because I love them all. And the thing is that is a good likelihood that there's going to be more than 3. That somebody that's
I think that's true. Let's not beat around the elephant in the room. The question is whether or not Bobak and Gore are going to
Right.
run. If they do, they'll probably wait till the last minute to file.
Sure.
And as I said in some of my writing about that, well, if the state didn't find that they had, under the narrowest technicality, that they didn't in fact break the law, although that was an interpretation that was against everything I've ever heard about the Sunshine
It made no
Law.
sense to me.
That sooner or later, the court of public opinion, and that's the election, is going to come up. So the question is it better that they just decide not to run, or is it better that they run and would hopefully get soundly defeated, and then the public, the voters, will get their chance to make this decision? As far as I'm concerned, what they did amounted to betrayal. It was unethical, and they should not be on the council.
So, a couple of quick questions. Do you think one of the two, or possibly both, will run?
I have no idea.
If you were to take a guess, would you say yes or no?
I would say that, judging from the very self-congratulatory piece that was in the Observer this week from Tracy Gore, that I would say she certainly sounds like she's planning to run. And
Setting the
fine,
stage.
I mean, she has a right to do that, and the voters will have a right to say, we've had enough of you. The reality of that is, if she and or Bobak would be reelected, then obviously all this that's happened doesn't matter enough to our voters, and we're going to end up with the government that we deserve.
See, I think that piece that I read, which I think was also in the Observer, right? I don't remember where it was, that Tracy wrote.
Well, it was only in the Observer.
Yeah, which I mean, clearly you can see which side that paper's taking.
Oh yeah.
The thing that I thought was interesting about that is that she repeatedly says, "Let's be nicer to people. Let's be nicer to people." Oh, sometimes people are mean, and yet the way she lit into Anita yesterday, that's what you folks need to do. You voters need to do. Read that piece that she wrote, and then go watch that video yesterday or Thursday, whenever the meeting was, when she lit into Anita like that. And it's ridiculous the way she treats her at some of those meetings. It's so disrespectful for somebody that's put in so much time.
Yeah, you're
I know I'm on a soapbox about the Anita thing, but it really got under my skin.
I like Anita very much. She's certainly a friend, and she's done a great deal of good for the town. I think, I'm disappointed more than anything else in Tracy. You said something a little earlier about how important this election is. The reality was that 3 years ago, both Tracy and Dennis Bobak were elected because of their unwavering opposition to the original TPI project. And they've had it. He's come up with a usable and doable proposal. And now it's time for the voters of the town to say, okay, enough of the opposition. Let's let the project go on. And that's kind of where we are. I was hoping when she was elected that she'd grow into it, mature, and start to understand that there's a difference between what her previous role had been, that of sort of tossing hand grenades in for a variety of subjects. And I understand that because I've done a certain amount of it myself. And from the outside, and then that she would make the transition once she was on the inside to showing a little more maturity, a little more restraint, and more than anything else between the two of them, a little more forethought into what some of these shoot from the hip decisions that they've made into where is this really likely to lead us. The first time Dennis Bobak was on the town council, they fired a perfectly good town manager on their very first meeting. This time he and Tracy Summer at that point, it took them 4 months to fire another perfectly good town manager, each with their own agenda. And I think they've done the town a great deal of harm. We've had this constant revolving door of managers, attorneys, planners, and all. I
want to tell you something.
There's no corporate knowledge, no corporate memory of any of this.
I was in a business yesterday. I'm not going to say the name of the business, but I was interviewing the business for something, and one of the things that he had to bite his tongue on, and I totally got it, was he's constantly harassed by the local government. And you would think that wouldn't be the case, but I get that feeling from this government that they're so against the businesses being successful, or if the businesses are successful, they got to get their cut, and if their cut isn't good enough, they're coming back for a bigger cut. And it's such BS that they have to be like that.
Yeah.
The parking thing, the parking rates, the going after the Times Square people, and listening to what he told me yesterday was just, it's just, we're going to reach into your pocket as deep as we can and pull out as much as we can, because if you're successful, then we want more of it.
I'm aware of some business people here in town who are basically biting their tongues from saying anything about the whole mess, the whole scandal about whether or not Gore Bobak should be on the council, because they're scared to death that if they were to open their mouths, suddenly all kinds of unpleasant things might happen to them and their businesses. And that's not the way this is supposed to be. You know, the reality of this is what's happening here is in fact a perfect microcosm of what's happening nationally.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the same BS that's coming out of
right.
Washington. It's the same total lack of willingness to accept responsibility, willingness to, admit your mistakes. You know, in my profession, performing in public, when I screwed up, everybody knew, and there was no place to hide. These people don't seem to understand that, you make a mistake, admit it, take responsibility.
Own it. Yeah, right.
And they're so delusional about this that I don't think they've even made a mistake. And once again, I'll go back to the idea that, okay, in March, the voters are going to have a chance to say, we think you made a mistake.
That's right. So the other thing I wanted to mention for folks that are listening or watching, when you go back, please go back and watch that council meeting on Thursday and watch the amount of useful information Dennis Bobak provides in any council meeting. There'll be a repeat it's a repeat of the same thing. He is providing useless information. He doesn't bring up anything worth talking about. He's a yes person to Tracy, as far as I can see from the meetings that I watch.
Well, I would say that because of the difference in their experiences, when they both were elected to the council, Tracy was a yes person for Dennis. Of course, he was mayor then and she wasn't. I'm not going to start talking about collusion. We've already talked about sunshine violations. I think, without knowing the statistics, I would suspect that the number of times they voted together is many. And that third swing vote, wherever it comes from, this council's recently, anytime anybody gets into a situation where they are given responsibility or authority, the first thing they want to do is impose their will on it. And I think people get on the council and say, well, we got to make more rules and more laws. And this council has gone out of its way more than others to tell people what they can't do. And I'd much prefer to see people on the council that are ready to tell people what they can do.
Well, Jay, anything else you want to mention before I let you run?
No.
That was enjoyable. You're awesome, man. You got to come back. We got to maybe we'll do our own show, me and you.
We can talk
politics. Talk politics. My wife isn't
into
into the politics thing. She doesn't like to talk about it as much. She thinks I go overboard.
Okay.
Sometimes I do, but when I watch those council meetings, I just want to punch the screen sometimes when I listen to some of it.
Years ago, during the advent of what was then called the Three Angry Men, I wrote a piece about that where I stopped going to the council meetings and started watching them on TV, because I could stand up and shout and swear at the TV and throw things at them, where if I did that in the actual council meeting, I'd get arrested. So, I understand what you're saying.
Real quick, we asked Connor Dieras to be on the show, and his apparently Leon and him are good friends. So Leon asked him for me, and the first answer I got was, would you do it at the Lonnie Kai? I said, for sure, we'll do it at the Lonnie Kai. Sure. Well, apparently they hadn't heard of the show or anything. Well, they went back and saw one of the old shows in January, and they said, "Oh no, we don't want an antagonizer." I'm an antagonizer. I didn't file a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I want to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention was, this is how peculiar this election can be, because if you go out and vote and you're voting for the 2 out of the 3 that are already running, let's say Tracy is the only one that runs, her group is going to just vote for Tracy. They're not going to vote for one of the other 3, and they have 2 votes. So that's how important it is for everybody to get involved and get voting and get your neighbor to vote for two of the three that we have on this side, just in case somebody runs, because they can overpower that by only voting for one.
I understand.
Because we're diluting our vote because we have to vote for two, and then we're picking from three.
Right.
So you have to be involved. That's
the reality of that, if you go back to the last council election, was that Bobak defeated his next closest candidate by 69 votes. And if there hadn't been 6 or 7 candidates, of which only a couple were genuinely viable,
there you go.
It was the same situation. He might not have been elected. But that's history. It's spilled.
Right.
We are where we are, and we'll find out